The door at the end of the hallway was always locked. No explanation, no key. Just a quiet rule that everyone in the family followed without question. Don't go near it. Don't ask about it. I grew up believing there was nothing strange about that. Some houses have old rooms. Some families have old rules. But the night my grandmother passed away, I noticed the lock was different. Someone had changed it recently. That's when I knew whatever was inside, it wasn't forgotten. It was hidden. My name is Sarah. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and I grew up in a house that felt warm on the surface. Sunday dinners, loud laughter, a mother who always smelled like cardamom and soap. But even as a child, I sensed the parts of our family that didn't quite fit together. My parents rarely argued, but when they did, it always stopped the moment anyone walked near that hallway. My older brother once dared me to touch the door when I was 7. Before I could reach it, my father appeared from nowhere, calm but firm, and sent us both to our rooms without a word. We never spoke about it afterward. That was how things worked in our house. You noticed the silence, you felt its weight, and then you moved on. I was good at that. For a long time, I was very good at that. What the rest of my family didn't know was that I had been keeping a small journal since I was 12. Not a diary of feelings, more like observations, dates, patterns. The way my mother's hands shook slightly whenever guests stayed too long near that hallway. The way my father always locked the main door before going near the back of the house alone, late at night. I never showed anyone those pages. I wasn't even sure why I was writing them down. Maybe some part of me understood even then that I was collecting evidence for a question I hadn't yet found the courage to ask. My grandmother, my father's mother, knew something. I was sure of it. She would sometimes look at me with this quiet, tired expression, like she was deciding whether to speak. She never did. But 3 days before she passed, she pressed a small key into my palm and closed my fingers around it. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The night of her funeral, the house was full of relatives and quiet grief. I stayed near the edges of every room, the key pressed flat in my pocket. I kept waiting for the right moment, though I wasn't sure what that meant. It came around midnight when the last guests had gone and my parents had finally fallen asleep. The hallway was dark and completely still. My footsteps felt too loud, even in socks. The key fit. That alone made my chest tighten, because it meant my grandmother had planned this. She had wanted me to open it. She had chosen me. The room was small, smelled of old paper and something faint I couldn't name. There was a wooden chair, a narrow table, and a single cardboard box sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. On top of the box, a handwritten note, my grandmother's writing. Careful and slow the way it had become in her final years. For Sarah, because you were always the one who noticed. I sat down on the floor right there, still in my funeral clothes, and I opened the box. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't this. Inside were photographs, letters, and a folded document that turned out to be a birth certificate. Not mine, not my siblings. The name on it was one I had never heard spoken aloud in our home, Imran, born to my father. 3 years before my oldest brother. The photograph showed a boy growing up in stages, a toddler, then a child with a school bag, then a young teenager smiling at the camera. He had my father's eyes. There was no question. The letters were between my grandmother and someone I couldn't identify. A woman whose handwriting was careful and formal. The tone was not angry. It was exhausted. Words like arrangement and it's better this way and the children don't need to know. I read them slowly, twice, trying to understand what had been decided and by whom. It became clear, piece by piece, the way a picture forms when you step back from it. My father had a son from before his marriage to my mother. Something had happened, a separation, a quiet agreement, and the boy had been taken elsewhere. No contact, no acknowledgement. Just a locked room and a family that learned not to ask. I didn't confront my father that night. I didn't the next morning either. I sat with what I knew for almost 2 weeks, carrying it the way my grandmother must have carried it for decades, carefully and mostly alone. When I finally spoke to my father, I didn't raise my voice. I placed the birth certificate on the table between us and sat down across from him. I watched his face move through several expressions before it settled into something old and tired. He didn't deny it, he didn't explain it away. He just looked at the photograph of the boy, now a grown man somewhere, with a life I knew nothing about, and he said quietly, "I thought it was the right thing at the time." I told him I wasn't there to judge him, and I meant it. But I also told him that I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know. That was the line I drew, not out of anger, but out of a deep, quiet need to be honest. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful reunion that fixed everything neatly. My father made contact, slowly and carefully, with his son, my half-brother. They exchanged a few messages. It was uncertain and fragile, the way most real things are. My mother found out. That was its own long, painful conversation, one I wasn't part of, but she stayed. Not because she forgave everything immediately, but because 30 years of a life together doesn't disappear overnight. And because she, like the rest of us, was learning that people are more complicated than the versions we keep of them. I kept the box. I still have my grandmother's note. Sometimes I take it out and read it, not because I need to, but because it reminds me that she trusted me with the truth when she could have taken it with her. That meant something. Still does. Some families keep secrets to protect people. Some keep them out of shame. Most of the time, it's both at once. I don't think my father was a villain, and I don't think my grandmother was a saint. They were just people who made choices in difficult moments and lived with them the best they could. I opened that room. I'm glad I did. Not because it made everything easier, but because the truth, even when it hurts, always deserves a door.